In this video, I'll be giving you my quick start guide to buying a bass guitar. Today's video is sponsored by DistroKid. As I've said before, DistroKid is my preferred distribution company. If you want to get your music online, DistroKid is pretty much the simplest and most cost-effective way to get your music up there. It's just a great platform with really great features, and Splits by DistroKid is just another one of those great features. Splits by DistroKid allows you to add unlimited collaborators to any track. It also allows you to change splits at any time. It allows you to add and remove those collaborators at any time, and it allows you to go back in time and see previous splits. One of my favourite features as a producer is the recoupment feature. The recoupment feature on DistroKid Splits allows you to send money to the person who's invested into that project first. So say you had a deal with a producer where they were going to get a certain split of the money after you've done the release, then they could receive that recoupment first before the rest of the band then receive payment from the release, to make sure that you don't fall out with your band members and that everybody is happy. As always, DistroKid doesn't take a penny, and that ensures that you and your collaborators are going to receive 100% of the earnings from your release by using splits with DistroKid. If you want to sign up to DistroKid, you can do so today, and it gets better because you will get a discount of 7% off your first year's membership if you use the link that is below me right now. Thank you so much to DistroKid for sponsoring this video, and now let's get into the bulk of this video. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about buying a bass guitar. I want you to be confident when going to buy your bass guitar, and hopefully by running through some of these features and some of these things to look out for when you're comparing bass guitars, I'm going to be able to help you make the best decision you can when buying your bass. If you enjoy this video, please hit the like button at any point, and if you get value from this video, let me know in the comments below. And also, just let me know what bass you buy. If you watch this video and go and buy an instrument, let me know what you buy in the comments below. The first thing, and probably the most major differentiator in tone between different instruments, is the pickups of a bass guitar. The pickups are these right here, the black bits typically on most guitars, and these are what translates the sound from the strings to your amplifier. There are lots of different types of pickups, and they all have different names that we kind of use in the bass community. This here would be a P pickup because it's typically found on precision basses, but it's split like this, and it kind of looks like it's two, but it's one pickup. The next type of pickup you'll find most commonly is this, which is a J pickup or a jazz pickup, because it first came on the Fender Jazz Bass. These pickups have a different character to the precision bass. They're not quite as fat, but they have a bit more definition and cut compared to a P bass pickup. The next most common pickup you'll find is one like this, which is a humbucker here on this Close Guitars Apollo Pro bass. Humbuckers or soap bar pickups are typically fatter sounding and have a deeper bass response, but they have a little bit of a scoop in the mid-range compared to a J or a P bass pickup. The next type of pickup would be this, which is a Music Man type pickup. It's an M pickup often, or a Music Man humbucker. So this is similar to the humbucker in the Close Guitar, but it just sounds a little bit more gnarly. It's got a bit more grit to it, a bit more punch than a typical humbucker. So it's kind of a more aggressive humbucker sound, and you'll find these often on Music Man, Sterling by Music Man basses, and just a lot of other manufacturers now like to put a pickup like this in their bass. And the other common type of pickup is a vintage style pickup like these here on this Warwick Star bass. These are going to be fatter, they're going to be typically rounder, they're going to sound somewhere between a precision bass pickup and a P bass pickup, but don't be deceived, sometimes these kind of big casings can have all sorts of things hidden underneath them, and it's always worth trying them out because you'll often find cool and quirky sounds in pickups that are this bigger vintage style. You'll find these often on hollow body basses, lots of the old school Gibson basses, Epiphone basses, and as I say, on this Warwick bass, Guild basses, Gretsch basses, those kind of companies that do quirky old school style designs. When it comes to pickup choices, 2 is seen as more versatile, and it definitely is because you can blend between the two, but at the same time, sometimes you just want the simplicity, and if you're just starting out, sometimes it can be really important just to have one pickup, like on a P bass, and learn what to do with that. You'll get a volume control, a tone control, and the pickup, and you can learn to get a variety of sounds using those simple controls, and then when you move up to a bass with more pickups, then you have a better understanding of how to get those different sounds out of that instrument. The most important thing I'd say when you're looking at what pickups to get is to find your favourite players and see what those guys are playing, because those are probably the tones that you enjoy in your head. The next major consideration when buying a bass guitar is how many strings do you want it to have. Most typically, I suggest people start out with a 4-string bass because that is the tradition. It's going to give you the most solid foundation in the roots of the bass guitar, and as well as keeping it simple when you're learning. But there is also the options to have a 5 and a 6-string bass guitar. A 5-string bass guitar will have an extra low string below it, but it only really gives you 4 more lower notes, and a 6-string will give you a top string, so you'll have a top C string, and that again will give you a few more notes. I stick with a 4-string because it's easier to mute, it keeps everything simple for you, and you'll learn the foundations of the bass guitar having the low E as the bottom string, so the way you play will be more traditional and give you a real grounding of where the instruments come from. And most parts you'll hear by most bass players on most records and live will be played on a 4-string bass. If you do want to go for a 5-string bass, just remember that the E string is really the fundamental low note on the bass guitar, and that those extra 4 notes that are below that on the B string are just there to really add an effect and be there for specific moments where you might want to have a really low note, but not really designed to be played all the time on those bottom strings, though that isn't always true and it does depend on the type of music. One real benefit of a 5-string bass is it gives you more options in terms of where to position your hands and where to play certain figures, but I think those things really are developed further down the line by playing 4-string and then applying those patterns to a 5-string. A 6-string bass is typically more used by jazz players or players that really want to extend the vocabulary of their instrument, making it not only a bass but more of a melodic instrument as well as a chordal instrument. I'd really suggest that you stay away from it as a player in your early stages, but if you're looking for something different or you're further down the line, 6 strings are really worth having and playing. Even if you don't keep them forever, it's worth trying and seeing how it changes your playing. The neck size is probably one of the most important features in terms of the playability of the instrument, and something you should be really wary of when you are going to buy your bass guitar. The neck size comes in various dimensions, and there are various things that people talk about, and I'm going to talk you through those now. The first one is nut width. The nut is this part here, this little white part here, where the strings go across and meet the headstock. This is the nut width here, so it's how wide the neck is from this point here to this point here. And that really varies and generally changes the feel dramatically. Typically on a bass like this, which is the precision bass, you're going to find that the nut is wider, which means that the string spacing is wider. This means that overall you've got a bit more space to play with, but the neck itself is bigger, and so it is slightly more difficult to play, particularly if you haven't yet got your technique up together. The next dimension is the front to back depth of the neck, so from the fretboard here to the back of the neck. That's going to change how it feels dramatically in the hand as well. Overall, when you're buying a bass, they will typically have the neck cut to a certain shape, and that is probably the biggest differentiator overall, and is the combination of the nut width and the depth of the neck. Typically there are 3 different shapes that are commonly used when it comes to necks, and these are the C shape, so that gives you a curve around the back of the neck. The D shape, which is a slightly flatter curve, so really quite a thin shaped, flatter neck. And then there's the U shape, which is a more old school build, and that is a bit deeper, so the front to back depth is deeper, and the curve is smaller at the back of the neck. So it's more of a what they call like a baseball bat size. But those are the 3 typical shapes, and I would suggest that if you're a beginner player, to stick to a C or a D shaped neck. But down the line you might find that you really want to venture to a U-shaped neck. But ultimately everybody is built differently, and what you find comfortable might not be what I find comfortable, might not be what the next person finds comfortable. So most important is to find the one that works for you. Overall, if you stick to a bass that has a thinner nut width, you're typically going to find that that bass's neck is slimmer and most likely for a beginner easier to play. Bass is a very physical instrument overall, and that's why I'm talking so much about these physical properties of the bass build itself. And the next feature I want to talk about is the scale length. That's the length from the bridge here all the way to the nut. And this can vary from bass to bass. Obviously, the length of an instrument is going to really change how it feels and how physically demanding it is. And that can vary from instrument to instrument. The typical length is this length, which is a long scale bass. And that's the original Fender scale of 34 inches. 30 inch, which is a short scale bass, and that's the original Fender short scale size, so the Fender Mustang basses now have those, and you also find a large number of manufacturers making short scale basses. They're really quite trendy at the minute, so builders like Supro, Ibanez do some short scale basses, as well as Gretsch. Lots of different companies at the lower end of the market are making short scale basses now, still the rarest to be manufactured, but still counts as a common size, is 32-inch, which is a medium scale bass, and you can find that on a bass such as the Squier Classic 5 Jaguar bass. Typically, the shorter the scale, the more bassy the instrument is going to be, but it's not going to be as punchy. With a longer scale bass, you're going to get more definition and punch, but obviously it will be a longer bass and slightly more difficult to play. Overall, I don't think you're sacrificing too much going for a shorter scale bass, but I do think it's best to learn on a longer scale bass because that gives you the option to be comfortable with a bigger bass and move down to a shorter scale, and you feel more comfortable, and it really hails the virtues of a shorter scale bass rather than being limited to just short scale basses, learning on a short scale, and then you can't really move up to a longer scale bass without a little bit more discomfort. It's always easier to, be trained to run 1,000 meters and then only run 500 than it is to run 500 and then be asked to do 1,000, if that makes sense. Another important feature that really changes the tone of the bass is the choice of wood. The first most obvious place that wood is used is on the fingerboard, and this is the dark wood that you're seeing here underneath the strings. Fingerboards are typically made of two materials. This material here is rosewood. This is one of the oldest choices, and this is a more warm sound, it's a darker sound, and it's less snappy, more warm, and it blooms a little bit more. The other most common choice is maple, and that is typified by a piece of natural light wood, and you'll find that on loads and loads of instruments all around different price ranges. Other choices are things like Indian laurel, which is very similar to rosewood, and you find that on a lot of the Squier Classic Vibe basses. Those Indian laurel fingerboards are similar to rosewood, but they have a little bit of a more open grain, which you can feel a little bit under your fingers, and are maybe a little darker than rosewood itself, but it really depends on the piece. And other woods are things like pau ferro, which is somewhere between the two. It's somewhere between maple and rosewood. It's a little bit brighter and more defined than rosewood, but it's not as bright and snappy and kind of gritty as maple. The other most common wood, but is primarily used on more expensive instruments, is ebony, which is a darker wood than rosewood, but is brighter in terms of tone than maple. The most important thing is to get something that you like the feel of under your fingers. If you don't like the feel of it under your fingers when you're playing the bass, then that can be a little bit of a sticking point. The next most obvious wood is the neck wood. This is typically just a piece of maple, and there are very few basses that don't use maple as the neck wood, but you can find other neck woods. The most important thing for me when looking at the neck of an instrument is to make sure that you like the feel of it. They can be finished differently. Sometimes they're finished with a satin finish, sometimes they're finished with more like a glossy finish, but overall you just want to make sure that your thumb when you're playing the bass doesn't get too stuck behind the neck and that it feels comfortable to you. The last place that wood is used, and that makes a change to the tone, is in the body. This is an alder bodied bass. You can't see alder because alder is quite a boring looking wood, but it is a really great wood for instruments, and I really like it because it's very balanced sounding. So most alder basses, they'll be finished with a paint job like this one. The other common wood you'll find on bass guitars and has been used through history is ash. Ash sounds a little bit different to alder. It varies in weight. It can be really lightweight if you get a great piece of swamp ash, or it can be really heavy if you've got a more traditional old school piece of ash. And often the bass end is bigger and the treble is a little bit snappier, but there's not as much mid-range content. Other than alder and ash, there are a number of other woods that get used commonly in the building of bass guitars, but I personally wouldn't worry about that too much. I just make sure that overall the bass is nice and light, a good weight for you, feels comfortable for you to play it on a strap, and just make sure that the neck isn't too heavy. So if the bass starts doing this when it's on a strap, you know that it's a neck heavy bass, and I suggest that you look for a different instrument because in the long term that's not going to be good for your playing or your technique or your body. The last things I would be looking at are just the overall construction of the instrument. You want to be making sure that it is finished well. You want to be making sure that there are no fret ends sticking out, which is the most common one. So you want to be able to run your hand and your fingers down the frets, not have any sharp edges catch on your fingers, because that is going to inhibit you over the duration of your ownership of the instrument. On lower end instruments, this can be more common, and of course you can take a file to them and finish them yourself, but you want to make sure that the instrument is as good as it possibly can be before you take it home. Other hardware things I'd be looking at are making sure that the tuners are nice and smooth and that each of them has a nice smooth action, and also that the nut is cut well. Sometimes I've seen on lower end instruments that the nut has been cut too deep or not cut correctly, and that causes the D string or the G string, or any of the strings really, depending on how it was cut, to buzz. If that's the case, then you want to make sure that you are either getting the nut replaced by the shop that you're buying the bass from, or that you just choose another instrument. So that's my quick start guide to some of the features you should be looking out for when you are buying a bass guitar, probably your first bass guitar. It's a great journey to be on and it's really exciting, but you want to make sure that you start out with the right instrument. And if you follow some of those guidelines and think about some of those different things when you are trying out different bass guitars, then ultimately you can't go wrong. The most important thing is to get out there, find something that you love the look of, something that you love the sound of, and something that feels comfortable, as those three things together are most likely to keep you coming back to the instrument and keep you playing, and that is the most important thing overall. Don't worry about what other people say, just worry about how you feel about the instrument and how that instrument makes you feel, and you can't go wrong. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and hit that subscribe button and notification bell if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you to DistroKid for sponsoring this video. You can check out the link to them in the description and go and claim your 7% off your first year membership, and also take advantage of Splits by DistroKid. And my Instagram will be linked below, and you can check me out there and see what I get up to on a daily basis. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.